Welcome, dear friends, to Mystic Bedtime Stories, where ancient tales drift through time like gentle whispers in the night. I'm your narrator, and tonight we embark on a journey that will carry you across millennia to a place where dreams were. Built from brick and starlight, where gardens bloomed impossibly high above the earth, and where the very stones seemed to hold secrets of eternity. As you settle into your comfortable space, perhaps drawing a soft blanket closer, allow yourself to breathe deeply. Feel the weight of the day beginning to lift from your shoulders. Tonight, we travel not just through space, but through time itself, back to the cradle of civilization, to the banks of the ancient Euphrates River, where once stood the most magnificent city the world had ever known. Close your eyes, if you wish, and let your imagination paint pictures in the darkness. Can you feel the warm desert wind beginning to stir? Can you sense the vast expanse of Mesopotamia, stretching endlessly under a canopy of stars that seemed closer to Earth in those ancient days? The same stars that guided shepherds and kings alike, the same constellations that witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Our story tonight takes us to Babylon, a name that even now, thousands of years later, carries with it an almost magical resonance. When you hear the word Babylon, what comes to mind? Perhaps images of towering ziggurats piercing the sky, or gardens cascading with impossible greenery in the midst of an arid landscape. Maybe you think of wise kings and ancient laws, or of the mysterious Tower of Babel reaching toward heaven itself. But tonight, we will discover that Babylon was more than legend, more than myth. It was a real place, inhabited by real people who dreamed impossible dreams and somehow made them come true. They were engineers and astronomers, poets and philosophers, merchants and craftsmen who transformed a simple settlement by the river into the wonder of the ancient world. As we begin our journey, imagine yourself standing at the edge of the vast Mesopotamian plain, just as the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon. The air is warm and dry, carrying with it the scent of palm trees and the distant sound of water flowing through ancient channels. Before you stretches a landscape that seems to shimmer in the fading light, and there, rising from the earth like a vision from a dream, you see the first glimpse of walls that seem to stretch impossibly high into the sky. These are the walls of Babylon, and they are calling to you across the centuries. They are brick and mortar, yes, but they are also something more. They are the physical manifestation of human ambition, the place where our ancestors first dared to build not just homes, but monuments to their dreams of touching the divine. Tonight, we will walk through those walls. We will pass through the great Ishtar Gate, where lions made of glazed brick have stood guard for millennia. We will climb the steps of the great ziggurat, feeling the worn stone beneath our feet as countless pilgrims felt it before us. We will wander through the legendary hanging gardens, breathing in the impossible fragrance of roses blooming in the desert air. But most importantly, we will meet the people who called this magnificent city home. We will walk in the sandals of Hammurabi, the king who gave the world its first written laws. We will stand beside Nebuchadnezzar as he gazed upon his greatest architectural achievements. We will listen to the prayers of priests in the great temple of Marduk, and hear the whispered calculations of astronomers who mapped the heavens with unprecedented precision. This is not just a story about buildings and kings, though those elements are certainly here. This is a story about human aspiration, about the eternal desire to create something beautiful and lasting, something that reaches beyond the mundane concerns of daily life towards something transcendent and eternal. As we prepare to enter the great gates of Babylon, take another deep breath. Feel yourself becoming lighter, as if the concerns of the modern world are gently falling away. The traffic and phones and endless notifications of our time cannot follow. You swear we are going. We are traveling to a place where time moves differently, where the rhythm of life was set by the rising and setting of the sun. by the phases of the moon, by the eternal turning of the seasons. The great gates are opening now, and beyond them lies a world that existed long before our time, yet somehow feels as familiar as a half-remembered dream. The guards at the gate nod respectfully as we pass, recognizing us as pilgrims who have come not to conquer or to judge, but simply to witness and to wonder. The cobblestones beneath our feet are smooth and worn, polished by countless footsteps over countless years. The walls on either side of us rise high into the evening sky, their surfaces decorated with the most beautiful glazed tiles the world had ever seen. Lions and bulls and dragons dance across the brick in brilliant blues and golds, their eyes seeming to follow our passage with ancient wisdom. And now, as we walk deeper into the city, we begin to hear the sounds of Babylon at twilight, the distant chanting of priests performing the evening rituals, the soft laughter of children playing in courtyards, the gentle splash of water in fountains and irrigation channels, the rhythmic hammering of craftsmen putting finishing touches on their work, the low murmur of merchants and customers in the great bazaars. But perhaps the most enchanting sound of all is the whisper of wind through the palm fronds high above us, in those legendary gardens that seem to float impossibly in the air. It is a sound that speaks of mysteries and miracles, of dreams made manifest in stone and earth and growing things. Welcome, then, to Babylon. Welcome to the city that touched the sky. Our journey together is just beginning, and ahead of us lie wonders that will fill your dreams with beauty and your heart with the timeless magic of human achievement. Let us walk together now, slowly and peacefully, into the most magnificent city the ancient world had ever known. As we move deeper into the heart of Babylon, let us pause for a moment and consider the remarkable geography that made this wonder possible. If you could soar like a bird high above the ancient landscape, you would see something quite extraordinary. Below you stretches a vast alluvial plain, created over millions of years by two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. As they carried rich silt from the mountains of Armenia down to the Persian Gulf, this land between the rivers, this Mesopotamia, was unlike anywhere else on earth. While much of the world remained wild and untamed, here nature had conspired to create the perfect conditions for civilization to flourish. The soil was dark and fertile, renewed each year by the gentle flooding of the rivers. The climate was warm enough to grow crops year-round, yet not so harsh as to make life unbearable. But it was the Euphrates River, flowing like a silver ribbon through this golden landscape, that would prove most crucial to our story. Picture this ancient waterway as it must have appeared 4,000 years ago, wider and more powerful than today. Its banks lined with date palms and tamarisk trees, its waters teeming with fish and supporting countless species of birds. It was here, at a particularly advantageous bend in the river, that the first settlers chose to establish what would eventually become Babylon. They were not the first people to recognize the potential of this location. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans had been living in this area for thousands of years before Babylon rose to prominence, drawn by the same natural advantages that would later make it the greatest city in the world. These early inhabitants were practical people, farmers and herders, who understood the rhythms of the river and the cycles of the seasons. They knew that the annual floods, far from being destructive, were a gift that renewed the fertility of their fields. They learned to channel the river's waters through carefully constructed irrigation canals, transforming the surrounding landscape into a green oasis in the midst of an otherwise arid region. Imagine walking through this early settlement in those distant days, perhaps around 2300 BC. The buildings are simple but sturdy, constructed of sun-dried brick made from the river mud. The streets are narrow and winding, following the natural contours of the land. In the center of the settlement stands a modest temple dedicated to Marduk, the patron god who would later become the supreme deity of the Babylonian pantheon. The people you pass are dressed in simple woolen garments, their faces marked by the sun and wind of outdoor labor. They speak in an ancient dialect of Akkadian, their words carrying the musical cadences of a language that would one day be written in the wedge-shaped characters we call cuneiform. Their days are structured around the eternal tasks of agriculture, planting and harvesting, tending animals, maintaining the irrigation systems that are the lifeline of their community. But even in these humble beginnings, there are signs of something extraordinary taking shape. The settlement is larger than most, its population swelling as people from surrounding areas are drawn by the promise of fertile land and abundant water. Trade routes are beginning to converge here, bringing merchants from distant lands who exchange goods and ideas with equal enthusiasm. The location itself is almost perfectly suited for such exchanges. Babylon sits at the narrowest point between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, making it a natural crossing point for travelers moving between the northern and southern regions of Mesopotamia. It is also positioned at the intersection of important overland trade routes, connecting the civilizations of the East with those of the West. As decades pass into centuries, this strategic position brings increasing prosperity to the growing city. Caravans arrive regularly, their camels and donkeys laden with goods from the mountains of Persia, the forests of Lebanon, the mines of Anatolia. They bring cedar wood and precious metals, exotic spices and fine textiles, but most importantly, they bring new ideas and technologies that will help transform a simple agricultural settlement into something far more ambitious. The people of Babylon are quick to recognize opportunity when they see it. They begin to specialize in various crafts and trades, moving beyond the simple agricultural economy of their ancestors. Some become skilled metalworkers, creating tools and weapons of bronze and later iron. Others develop expertise in pottery, weaving, or jewelry making. Still others become professional merchants, organizing trading expeditions to distant lands and establishing the commercial networks that will eventually span the known world. But perhaps the most significant development during this early period is the emergence of an administrative class, skilled scribes and officials who can read and write the complex cuneiform script, keep accurate records of trade transactions, and manage the increasingly sophisticated systems of law and government that a growing city requires. It is during this formative period that Babylon first begins to assert its independence from the various kingdoms and city-states that have previously dominated the region. The city's growing wealth and strategic importance attract the attention of ambitious leaders who see in Babylon the potential for something greater than a mere trading post. One such leader emerges around 1894 BCE, a man whose name has been lost to history, but whose vision would shape the destiny of Babylon for millennia to come. He is the first to declare Babylon an independent kingdom, establishing the first Babylonian dynasty and beginning the transformation of a prosperous city into the capital of an empire. Under his leadership and that of his successors, Babylon begins to expand its influence throughout the region. The city's armies, equipped with bronze weapons and organized according to advanced military principles, prove remarkably effective in battle. More importantly, Babylon's rulers demonstrate a genius for administration, establishing legal and governmental systems that allow them to effectively govern the diverse populations they conquer. The city itself begins to reflect this growing ambition. The modest temple of Marduk is expanded and rebuilt, its walls rising higher toward the sky. The royal palace grows more elaborate with each generation, its courtyards filled with gardens and fountains that speak of wealth and sophistication. The city walls are strengthened and extended, creating a defensive perimeter that can protect not just the original settlement, but the growing suburbs and commercial districts that sprawl outward from the ancient core. As we stand here in the early evening light, watching the sun sink lower toward the western horizon, We can almost see the ghost of that ancient settlement shimmering in the warm air. The Babylon of our story is still centuries in the future, but already the seeds of greatness have been planted in the fertile soil beside the Euphrates. The river continues to flow as it has for millennia, carrying the dreams and ambitions of countless generations toward the sea. But now those dreams are taking on a new form, shaped by the unique combination of geography, opportunity, and human ambition that will soon produce one of the greatest cities the world has ever known. Tonight, as we continue our journey through the streets of Babylon, we walk not just through space, but through time itself, witnessing the slow but inexorable transformation of a simple river settlement into the magnificent capital of human aspiration. As we continue our gentle stroll through the ancient streets of Babylon, the evening shadows grow longer, and the warm golden light of oil lamps begins to flicker in windows and doorways. It is in this peaceful twilight that we encounter one of the most remarkable figures in human history, a king whose name has echoed through the millennia, whose legacy shaped not just Babylon, but the very concept of justice itself. His name was Hammurabi, and he ruled Babylon from 1792 to 1750 BCE, during what historians call the Old Babylonian period. But to understand the true magnitude of his achievement, we must first imagine Babylon as it existed when he ascended to the throne, a prosperous but relatively small kingdom surrounded by powerful rivals and constant threats. Picture young Hammurabi, as he might have appeared in those early days of his reign. He is a man of medium height, with the dark hair and olive complexion typical of his people, his eyes sharp with intelligence, and steady with the quiet confidence of one born to rule. His garments are rich, but not ostentatious, made of fine wool, dyed in deep blues and purples, cut in the flowing style favored by Mesopotamian nobility. When Hammurabi became king, Babylon controlled only the central portion of Mesopotamia, a territory perhaps 100 miles in each direction. To the north lay the powerful kingdom of Assyria, to the south the ancient Sumerian city-states, and to the east and west various tribal confederations that posed constant threats to trade routes and border settlements. But Hammurabi possessed something that would prove more valuable than armies or treasure, a vision of what Babylon could become. He understood that true power lay not merely in conquest, but in the ability to create systems of government and law that could unite diverse peoples under a single stable authority. His first years as king were spent in careful preparation. He strengthened Babylon's defenses, improved the irrigation systems that fed the city's prosperity, and most importantly, began to develop the administrative structures that would allow him to govern effectively once his kingdom began to expand. The expansion, when it came, was swift and decisive. Through a combination of military prowess, diplomatic skill, and sheer force of personality, Hammurabi conquered his neighbors one by one. But unlike many conquerors before and since, he did not simply plunder and destroy. Instead, he incorporated each conquered territory into his growing empire, bringing not just Babylonian rule, but Babylonian civilization to peoples who had never known such stability and prosperity. By the middle of his reign, Hammurabi's empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the hills of Assyria, encompassing most of what we now call Iraq and parts of modern-day Syria and Iran. He had united under a single crown a region that had been divided into warring city-states for centuries, creating the first truly unified Mesopotamian empire. But it was not military conquest that would make Hammurabi immortal in human memory. It was something far more profound and lasting, his decision to create a comprehensive legal code that would govern all aspects of life within his empire. Imagine, if you will, the great palace of Babylon during the later years of Hammurabi's reign. In a vast hall lined with scribes and advisors, the king sits on a throne of polished cedar wood, its arms carved with images of lions and eagles. Before him lie hundreds of clay tablets, each one containing records of legal disputes, precedents, and judgments that have accumulated over decades of royal administration. Hammurabi has made a decision that will echo through history. He will take all of this accumulated legal wisdom and organize it into a single, comprehensive code of laws that will apply equally to all citizens of his empire, regardless of their city of origin or social status. It is an undertaking of unprecedented ambition, requiring not just legal expertise, but a deep understanding of human nature and social organization. The work takes years to complete. Teams of scribes labor day and night, carefully copying and organizing the various legal precedents. Scholars debate the finer points of jurisprudence, seeking to create a system that is both just and practical. The king himself participates actively in the process, his keen mind grappling with questions that had never been systematically addressed before. What should be the penalty for theft? How should disputes between merchants be resolved? What rights should women have in matters of divorce and property? How should the state deal with crimes of violence? These and thousands of other questions had to be answered with wisdom and fairness, creating a legal framework that could govern the lives of millions of people. When the work is finally complete, Hammurabi makes another revolutionary decision. Rather than keeping these laws secret, known only to judges and royal administrators, he will make them public, carving them in stone and placing them in temples and public squares throughout his empire, so that every citizen can know exactly what the law requires of them. The most famous of these stone monuments is a magnificent black diorite stele, nearly 8 feet tall, that was erected in the Temple of Marduk in Babylon itself. At the top of the stele is carved a relief showing Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god and deity of justice, receiving the laws directly from the divine realm. Below this scene, in neat columns of cuneiform script, are inscribed the 282 laws that make up the Code of Hammurabi. As we stand before this ancient monument, in the flickering light of oil lamps, we can almost feel the weight of history pressing down upon us. These are not just laws, but the foundation stones of civilization itself, the first systematic attempt to create a society governed by written rules rather than the arbitrary whims of local officials. The laws themselves reveal a society of remarkable sophistication and complexity. There are regulations governing everything from the price of bread to the penalties for adultery, from the rights of adopted children to the proper way to conduct business transactions. The famous principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth is here, but so are more nuanced provisions that take into account the social status and circumstances of both victim and perpetrator. What strikes us most forcefully about these ancient laws is their fundamental humanity. While they may seem harsh by modern standards, they represent a genuine attempt to create a fair and just society. The weak are protected from exploitation by the strong. Women are granted certain rights and protections that were revolutionary for their time, and even slaves are accorded a degree of legal protection. Perhaps most importantly, the Code of Hammurabi establishes the principle that the law applies equally to all citizens, regardless of their social rank or personal relationship to the king. This may seem obvious to us today, but in Hammurabi's time, it was a radical departure from the traditional system of personal rule by tribal chieftains and city-state kings. As we read through these ancient laws by the gentle light of our oil lamps, we begin to understand why Hammurabi's name has survived for nearly 4,000 years. He was not just a successful conqueror or a skilled administrator, but a visionary who understood that true civilization requires more than wealth and military power. It requires justice, fairness, and the rule of law. The black stele stands silent in the temple, its surface worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, but its message remains as clear today as it was when it was first carved. Here is proof that human beings, even in the most ancient times, possessed the wisdom and moral courage to create systems of justice that could protect the innocent and punish the guilty. As we prepare to leave this sacred space and continue our journey through the wonders of Babylon, we carry with us the memory of Hammurabi's great achievement. In an age when might usually made right, he chose to create a society where right made might, where the power of the state was constrained by written law and the principles of justice. The gentle night breeze stirs the palm fronds overhead, and in their whispered rustling, we can almost hear the voice of the great king himself, speaking across the centuries to remind us that the foundations of civilization are not built of stone and gold, but of wisdom, justice, and the eternal human aspiration to create a better world for our children. As we leave the sacred temple where Hammurabi's laws were carved in stone, our footsteps carry us through the winding streets of Babylon toward what many consider the most magnificent architectural achievement in the ancient world. The evening air is growing cooler now, and the stars are beginning to appear in the darkening sky above us. But ahead, through the gentle shadows, we can see a glow that seems almost magical in its intensity. Dotted is the light reflecting off the glazed tiles of the Ishtar Gate, and as we draw closer, we begin to understand why ancient travelers would journey for months just to witness this marvel with their own eyes. Rising before us like a vision from a dream is a structure that defies every expectation of what ancient architecture could achieve. The Ishtar Gate stands nearly 50 feet high, its massive walls curving inward to create a ceremonial entrance. That is both imposing and beautiful. But it is not the size alone that takes our breath away. It is the color, the brilliant, impossible blue that seems to glow with its own inner light. Even in the gathering darkness of evening, this is no ordinary blue, but a deep, rich azure created by glazing techniques that represent the pinnacle of ancient ceramic artistry. The craftsmen who created these tiles mixed crushed lapis lazuli, the most precious blue pigment in the ancient world, with tin and copper oxides to create a color so vivid, so pure, that it seems to pulse with life itself. As we approach the great gate, walking along the processional way that leads to its entrance, we begin to see the details that make this structure truly extraordinary. The blue background is not empty, but filled with a parade of animals that seem to move and breathe in the flickering light of the torches that line the pathway. Lions stride across the surface of the gate, their bodies rendered in brilliant yellow, and white glazed tiles, their manes flowing like golden rivers, their eyes alert and intelligent. These are not mere decorations, but sacred symbols of Ishtar herself, the goddess of love and war for whom the gate is named. Each line is slightly different from the others, as if the ancient artists understood that true beauty lies not in mechanical repetition, but in the subtle variations that make each creature unique. Above the lions, in alternating rows, march the bulls of Adad, the storm god, their powerful bodies rendered in white and yellow against the blue background. Their horns curve gracefully upward, and their eyes seem to watch the approaching visitors with calm dignity. Between the bulls appear the dragons of Marduk, mythical creatures with the body of a serpent, the front legs of a lion, the hind legs of an eagle, and heads that combine feline and reptilian features in a way that is both fearsome and beautiful. The processional way itself is no less magnificent than the gate it leads to. The street is paved with red and yellow bricks, each one carefully fitted to create a smooth surface worthy of the gods themselves. The walls on either side of the street rise 20 feet high, their surfaces covered with the same brilliant blue tiles that adorn the gate. Here, however, the decorative animals are exclusively lions, 60 of them in total, arranged in a stately procession that guides visitors toward the sacred heart of the city. As we walk slowly along this ancient street, our footsteps echoing softly off the glazed brick walls, we can almost hear the ghostly sounds of the great festivals that once took place here. During the annual Akitu festival, celebrating the Babylonian New Year, this street would have been filled with thousands of people, all dressed in their finest clothing, carrying offerings for the gods and singing hymns of praise and thanksgiving. Procession would have been led by the king himself, walking barefoot as a sign of humility before the gods, followed by the high priests carrying the sacred statues of Marduk and other deities. Behind them would have come the nobles and officials of the court, then the merchants and craftsmen, and finally the common people, all united in their devotion to the gods who had made Babylon the greatest city in the world. The Ishtar Gate was not just a single structure, but part of a complex defensive system that included a smaller gate beyond it, creating a double barrier that any enemy would have to overcome to enter the city. But the psychological impact of the gate was perhaps more important than its military function. Any visitor approaching Babylon would see this magnificent structure from miles away, its blue tiles gleaming in the sunlight, its animal figures seeming to move and dance in the heat shimmer of the desert air. The message was clear. This was not just any city, but the dwelling place of the gods themselves, protected by divine power and decorated with divine beauty. The very colors spoke of wealth and power beyond imagination, for blue glazed tiles were so expensive to produce that only the greatest empires could afford to use them on such a massive scale. The techniques used to create these tiles were closely guarded secrets passed down through generations of master craftsmen who worked in the royal workshops under the direct supervision of the king's architects. The process began with the selection of the finest clay, which was then shaped into tiles of various sizes and fired in special kilns that could reach temperatures of over 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. The glazing itself was a complex process that required perfect timing and temperature control. The base glaze was applied first, creating the brilliant blue background. Then the animal figures were added using different colored glazes, each one requiring a separate firing to achieve the proper color and texture. The slightest mistake could ruin months of work, and only the most skilled artisans were trusted with this sacred task. But the true genius of the Ishtar Gate lay not just in its technical excellence, but in its psychological impact. The ancient architects understood that the human mind responds powerfully to color and beauty, and they used this knowledge to create a structure that would inspire awe and reverence in all who saw it. The blue of the tiles was not chosen at random, but because it was the color of the heavens, the realm of the gods. The animals were not merely decorative, but sacred symbols that connected the earthly city with the divine realm. The very act of passing through the gate was transformed into a religious experience, a journey from the mundane world outside into the sacred space within. As we stand before the great gate in the gathering darkness, with stars beginning to appear in the sky above, and the gentle sound of water flowing in the nearby irrigation channels, we can feel something of the wonder that ancient visitors must have experienced. This is architecture that does more than simply shelter or defend. It uplifts the spirit, connects the human with the divine, and reminds us that we are capable of creating beauty that can outlast empires and touch the hearts of people across millennia. The glazed tiles catch the last rays of the setting sun, and for a moment, the entire gate seems to glow with an inner fire, as if the spirits of the ancient craftsmen who created it are still present, still proud of their magnificent achievement. The lions seem to breathe, the bulls to stir, the dragons to shift their coils, all of them eternal guardians of the greatest city the world had ever known. Through this gate passed kings and merchants, priests and pilgrims, ambassadors and conquerors, all of them transformed by the experience of entering a place where human ambition and divine inspiration had combined to create something truly extraordinary. Tonight, as we prepare to pass through these same gates, we join that eternal procession, becoming part of the continuing story of human wonder and achievement. Having passed through the magnificent Ishtar Gate, We now find ourselves in the sacred heart of Babylon, where the evening shadows are deepest and the air seems to pulse with an almost mystical energy. Before us, rising from the earth like a mountain built by human hands, stands the most ambitious architectural project ever attempted in the ancient world, the great ziggurat called Itamananki, which in the ancient Babylonian language means the foundation of heaven and earth. This is no ordinary building, but a structure that challenges our very understanding of what ancient peoples could achieve. As we crane our necks to look upward, we see tier upon tier of massive brick walls rising into the star-filled sky, each level smaller than the one below, creating a stepped pyramid that seems to ascend directly into the realm of the gods themselves. The ziggurat stands nearly 300 feet high, its base covering an area of more than 4 acres. To put this in perspective, imagine a building the size of a modern city block, rising to the height of a 30-story skyscraper, constructed entirely of handmade bricks by people who had no machinery more complex than ramps and pulleys. The sheer audacity of the project takes our breath away, but Itamananki was more than just an impressive feat of engineering. It was the physical manifestation of the Babylonian belief that their city was the center of the universe, the place where heaven and earth met, where the gods came down to dwell among mortals. Every brick was laid with religious purpose. Every step upward was a step closer to the divine realm. As we begin our ascent of the great ziggurat, following the broad ramps that wind around its exterior, we can feel the weight of history beneath our feet. These same paths were walked by countless pilgrims over the centuries, each one seeking to draw closer to the gods by climbing toward the heavens. The bricks beneath our sandals are worn smooth by millions of footsteps, and in the gathering darkness, we can almost see the ghostly figures of ancient priests making their way slowly upward, carrying offerings and prayers to the shrine at the summit. The construction of this massive structure required the labor of thousands of workers over many decades. Each brick was made by hand from the clay of the Euphrates River, mixed with straw and other organic materials to prevent cracking, then fired in kilns or simply dried in the desert sun. The larger bricks at the base of the structure weigh several 100 pounds each and had to be moved into place using wooden rollers and teams of oxen. The ancient builders faced challenges that would daunt modern engineers. How do you create a foundation strong enough to support such enormous weight? How do you ensure that the structure will remain stable as it rises higher and higher? How do you transport millions of bricks to the construction site and lift them hundreds of feet into the air? The solutions they developed were ingenious in their simplicity. The foundation was built on a base of natural rock, reinforced with layers of reeds and asphalt to create a flexible platform that could accommodate the settling of the massive structure. The walls were built with a slight inward slope, creating a pyramid shape that was inherently stable, and the entire structure was honeycombed with internal chambers and passages that reduced its weight while maintaining its strength. As we climb higher, pausing occasionally to catch our breath and look out over the city spread below us, we begin to understand why this structure captured the imagination of ancient peoples throughout the known world. From each level, we can see farther and farther across the Mesopotamian plain, until at the highest points, the entire world seems to spread out beneath us like a map. The ziggurat was not just a temple, but an astronomical observatory, a place where the priest astronomers of Babylon could study the movements of the stars and planets with unprecedented accuracy. The ancient Babylonians were among the world's first scientific astronomers, and their observations from the top of Etamananki contributed to the development of mathematical astronomy that would influence Greek, Islamic, and eventually European science. But it is the religious significance of this structure that truly captures our imagination. At the very top of the ziggurat, accessible only by a narrow stairway that winds through the interior of the building, stood the shrine of Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon. This was no ordinary temple, but a sacred chamber where the god was, believed to dwell physically, where his golden statue was tended by the highest priests of the realm. The shrine itself was a marvel of ancient craftsmanship, its walls covered with gold and precious stones, its ceiling painted with stars and constellations that mirrored the heavens above. Here, during the great festivals, the king himself would climb to present offerings and receive the blessings of the god. It was said that from this sacred chamber, Marduk ruled not just Babylon, but the entire universe. As we stand on one of the upper terraces, looking out over the city in the soft starlight, we cannot help but think of the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. Could this magnificent structure have been the inspiration for that ancient tale? The similarities are striking. A great tower built by human hands, reaching toward heaven, constructed by people who spoke a single language and shared a common purpose. The biblical account tells of God's displeasure with human ambition, of the confusion of languages, and the scattering of peoples that followed. But as we stand here in the gentle night breeze, surrounded by the evidence of human achievement and divine inspiration, we might wonder if the ancient storytellers missed something important in their tale. Perhaps the real miracle of Etemenanke was not its height or its grandeur, but its demonstration of what human beings could accomplish when they worked together toward a common goal. The ziggurat was built by people from many different cultures and backgrounds, united by their shared faith in the gods and their collective vision of creating something greater than themselves. The construction required not just physical labor, but mathematical precision, engineering skill, artistic vision, and organizational ability of the highest order. It demanded cooperation between rulers and subjects, between skilled craftsmen and common laborers, between priests and architects. In a very real sense, the ziggurat was a testament to the power of human civilization itself. As we continue our ascent, the city below us gradually disappears into the darkness, and we begin to feel as if we are climbing not just a building, but a pathway between worlds. The air grows thinner and cooler as we rise, and the stars seem to grow brighter and closer. We can understand why the ancient Babylonians believed that this was truly a place where heaven and earth met. The ziggurat served many practical purposes beyond its religious function. It was a landmark that could be seen from great distances, guiding travelers and merchants to the city. It was a symbol of royal power and divine favor, demonstrating to all who saw it that Babylon was blessed by the gods. And it was a center of learning and culture, where the wisdom of ages was preserved and transmitted to future generations. But perhaps most importantly, Etemenanke was a statement of human aspiration, a physical manifestation of the eternal desire to reach beyond the limitations of ordinary existence towards something transcendent and eternal. It was humanity's first great attempt to build a stairway to heaven, and in that attempt we can see reflected all of our highest hopes and deepest longings. As we reach the upper levels of the ziggurat, the world below seems to fade away, and we are left alone with the stars and the gentle whisper of wind through the ancient stones. Here, in this sacred space between earth and sky, we can feel the presence of something greater than ourselves, something that has watched over human civilization for millennia and continues to inspire us to reach for the stars. The great ziggurat stands as eternal testament to the power of human dreams and the courage required to make them reality. In its shadow, we are reminded that we are all part of something larger than ourselves, all participants in the great human project of building bridges between the earthly and the divine. As the moon reaches its zenith over ancient Babylon, casting silver light across the ziggurat's weathered stones, we turn our attention to perhaps the most mysterious and beautiful of all the city's wonders. In the heart of this desert metropolis, where sand and stone dominated the landscape for countless miles, there once rose something that seemed to defy the very laws of nature itself. Picture if you will, the approach to the royal palace in the early morning hours. The sun has not yet burned away the precious dew, and a soft breeze carries with it something unexpected in this arid land: the gentle fragrance of jasmine and roses, the earthy scent of moist soil, and the whisper of leaves rustling in terraced gardens that seem to float in the air like a verdant mirage, the hanging gardens of Babylon. Even the name carries with it a sense of wonder, a promise of impossibility made manifest. These gardens are thought to have been located near the royal palace in Babylon, and according to the accounts that have drifted down through the centuries like seeds on the wind, they were nothing short of miraculous. Imagine yourself as a weary traveler, having journeyed for weeks across the harsh Mesopotamian desert. Your eyes have grown accustomed to endless horizons of sand and stone, to the bleached bones of ancient riverbeds, and to the punishing clarity of a sun that shows no mercy. Then, as you approach the great walls of Babylon, you see something that makes you question whether you have entered a dream. Rising before you, tier upon tier, are gardens that seem to cascade down from the heavens themselves, not planted in the earth, but suspended in the air, each level supporting lush vegetation that should not exist in this place, under this relentless sun. The sight is so extraordinary that the ancient Greek historian Strabo would later write of it with barely contained amazement, describing a complicated machinery of screws which drew water up from the river to water the gardens. The structure itself was a marvel of engineering that would challenge architects even today. Diodorus describes the gardens as square-shaped, with each side measuring 4 plethra, approximately 400 feet on each side. Imagine a structure nearly as large as a modern city block, but built not outward, but upward, in a series of ascending terraces. Each terrace was supported by massive brick walls, 22-foot thick brick walls, strong enough to bear not just the weight of the earth above, but the constant moisture that would have been necessary to keep such gardens alive. The engineering required for this feat was staggering. These walls were not simply barriers, but hollow structures filled with carefully prepared soil, deep enough to allow even the largest trees to take root and flourish. As you climb the stairs that wind between these terraces, you begin to understand the true genius of this construction. The lowest level might have been planted with date palms and other trees that could tolerate the desert climate. But as you ascend, the plants become more exotic, more delicate, more impossible in this setting. Here are plants that would have been gathered from the far corners of the known world-fragrant herbs from the mountains of Lebanon, flowering vines from the valleys of Persia, fruit trees from the gardens of Egypt. The highest terrace, according to ancient accounts, rose 50 cubits above the ground, nearly 75 feet high. From this elevation, you could look out over the entire city of Babylon, over the Euphrates River winding its way through the desert, and over the vast expanse of the Mesopotamian plain stretching to the horizon. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these gardens was not their height or their beauty, but the intricate system that kept them alive. In a land where water was more precious than gold, where every drop had to be carefully conserved and channeled, someone had devised a way to continuously lift water from the Euphrates River to the highest terraces of the gardens. The ancient writers described this system with a mixture of technical precision and obvious wonder. Water was drawn up from the river and distributed throughout the gardens by a series of pumps, channels, and cisterns, which would have required advanced knowledge of hydraulics and engineering. Picture bronze gears turning slowly but steadily, operated perhaps by teams of oxen or by the flow of the river itself. Water wheels lifting the precious liquid in a continuous stream, carrying it through hidden channels built into the very structure of the terraces. The sound of this water system would have been constant and soothing, a gentle murmur of flowing water that created its own peaceful atmosphere. Imagine walking through these gardens in the heat of the day, when the sun beats down mercilessly on the city below, and hearing the soft trickle of water running through concealed channels, feeling the cool mist that rises from carefully placed fountains, sensing the blessed relief of shade provided by leaves that should not exist in this place. Legend tells us that these gardens were built for love. The story goes that King Nebuchadnezzar II, the great builder of Babylon, created them for his wife, Queen Amytis of Media. She was homesick, the tale suggests, longing for the green hills and lush valleys of her homeland. And so, in a gesture of devotion that would echo through the ages, her husband commanded that the impossible be made possible, that the mountains and meadows of her youth be recreated in the heart of the desert. Whether this romantic tale is true or not, it speaks to something profound about human nature. In our dreams, we often seek to overcome the limitations of our environment, to create oases of beauty and peace in the midst of harshness. The hanging gardens, real or imagined, represent this eternal human desire to transform the world around. U.S. to make it more beautiful, more comfortable, more aligned with our deepest longings. As you rest on a marble bench within these gardens. Perhaps in the cool of the evening, when the harsh sun has finally begun to set, you might notice the incredible diversity of life that has been gathered here. Rare birds from distant lands nest in the branches above your head. Butterflies with wings like stained glass flutter from flower to flower. The air is alive with the gentle buzz of bees and the soft rustle of leaves sounds that would have been almost unknown in the desert city beyond these walls. The gardens were not just a display of wealth and power, though they certainly demonstrated both. They were a statement about the relationship between humanity and nature, about our ability to create environments that nurture both body and spirit. In a world where most people lived in close proximity to the harsh realities of desert life, these gardens offered a glimpse of paradise, a reminder of what was possible when human ingenuity was combined with unlimited resources and unwavering determination. Yet, even as we marvel at the descriptions of these gardens, we must acknowledge a profound mystery. No extant Babylonian texts mention the gardens, and no definitive archaeological evidence has been found in Babylon. Despite centuries of searching, archaeologists have found no trace of these magnificent structures. This absence of evidence has led some scholars to question whether the gardens ever existed at all, or whether they might have been located elsewhere entirely. After 2 centuries of archaeologists scouring Babylon's 4 square miles for proof of the wonder, Assyriologist Stephanie Daly posed a bombshell conjecture. The gardens were, in fact, Assyrian and built 300 miles away in Nineveh by Sennacherib. This theory suggests that the gardens were real, but that over time, the stories became attached to the more famous city of Babylon rather than their actual location. But perhaps the truth of the hanging gardens lies not in their physical existence, but in their symbolic power. They represent humanity's eternal dream of creating paradise on earth, of transforming the harsh realities of life into something beautiful and nurturing. Whether they stood in Babylon or Nineveh, or existed only in the collective imagination of ancient storytellers, they continue to inspire us with their vision of what is possible when we dare to dream beyond limitations of our immediate circumstances. As the night deepens around ancient Babylon, and the moon continues its silent journey across the star-filled sky, we can imagine the gardens as they might have appeared in the darkness. Moonbeams filtering through the leaves of trees that grew impossibly high above the desert floor. The sound of water continuing its eternal circulation through hidden channels. The fragrance of night-blooming flowers carried on the cool evening breeze. In this place of wonder, where the impossible was made real, where the desert bloomed with the lushness of a distant paradise, we find a perfect metaphor for the power of human imagination and determination. The hanging gardens of Babylon remind us that even in the harshest environments, even in the most challenging circumstances, it is possible to create beauty, to nurture life, and to build something that touches the sky. And perhaps, as you prepare for sleep tonight, you might carry with you a vision of those terraced gardens, hanging in the air like a green dream above the ancient city. In your mind's eye, you can walk those marble pathways, feel the cool spray of the fountains, and rest in the shade of trees that defied the desert sun. For in our dreams, as in the dreams of those ancient builders, anything is possible, and paradise is always within reach. The hanging gardens of Babylon, whether real or imagined, stand as one of humanity's most beautiful expressions of hope, a testament to our endless capacity to envision and create wonders that lift the spirit and nourish the soul. In their memory, we too can dare to dream of making the impossible possible, of creating beauty where none existed before, and of building bridges between the world as it is and the world as it could be. As our journey through the moonlit streets of ancient Babylon continues, we find ourselves drawn toward the spiritual heart of this magnificent city. Behind us, the terraced gardens still glisten with their impossible beauty, but ahead lies something even more profound, the sacred precinct where the soul of Babylon itself resided, in the center of the city. Just south of the towering ziggurat Etemenanki stands a temple complex that served as the spiritual anchor for an entire civilization. The Esagila, whose very name means the house whose top is lofty, was more than simply a place of worship. It was the earthly dwelling place of Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon, the deity who had transformed from a local patron into the king of all the gods. Listen carefully, and you might hear the echo of ancient footsteps across the temple's polished stone floors. These are not the hurried steps of the everyday world, but the measured pace of priests who have dedicated their lives to serving something greater than themselves. The soft whisper of robes against marble, the gentle chime of ceremonial bells, and the distant chanting of hymns that have been sung in this place for over 1,000 years. Marduk's story is one of transformation and triumph, a tale that mirrors the rise of Babylon itself. Originally, he was simply the patron deity of a modest city along the Euphrates River. But as Babylon grew in power and influence, so too did the stature of its god. By the time of Hammurabi in the 18th century before the Common Era, Marduk had been elevated to the position of supreme deity of the entire Mesopotamian pantheon, ruler of all the gods and goddesses who governed the natural world. The most sacred story of Marduk's ascension is told in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that was recited every year during the most important religious ceremony of the calendar. Picture yourself standing in the vast courtyard of the Esagila temple as the high priest begins to chant this ancient tale. His voice rises and falls with the rhythm of poetry that has been perfected over centuries, telling of the primordial chaos when the fresh waters of Apsu mingled with the salt waters of Tiamat in the time before time in those days. The story goes, there were no gods, no heavens, no earth, only the swirling waters of possibility. From this primordial union, the first generation of gods was born, but their celebration and noise disturbed the peaceful slumber of the ancient waters. Apsu and Tiamat, wearied by the clamor of their divine offspring, decided to destroy them, all and return the universe to its original silence. But one among the younger gods stood forth to challenge this decree of annihilation. Marduk, young and strong and terrible in his power, accepted the challenge to face the monstrous Tiamat in single combat. Armed with bow and arrow, with nets and winds at his command, he ventured forth to battle the embodiment of primordial chaos herself. The confrontation was epic in scope. Tiamat, transformed into a dragon of unimaginable size and fury, opened her jaws to swallow Marduk whole. But the young god drove the winds into her mouth, distending her body, and then shot an arrow straight into her heart. From her corpse he fashioned the heavens and the earth, establishing order where there had been only chaos, creating the world as we know it. This victory earned Marduk the title of King of the Gods, and with it came the responsibility for maintaining cosmic order. He established the calendar, set the paths of the stars, and created humanity from the blood of the defeated gods to serve the divine powers. Most importantly for the people of Babylon, he chose their city as his earthly dwelling place, making it the center of the world. The Esagila temple itself was described in the creation myth as Marduk's own handiwork, built by the god himself as a perfect replica of his heavenly palace. The temple complex was enormous, measuring 660 feet on its longest side, with 3 vast courtyards surrounded by chambers for the priests, treasury rooms for the temple's wealth, and workshops where skilled craftsmen created the sacred objects needed for worship. But the heart of the temple was the inner sanctuary, where the statue of Marduk himself resided. This was no ordinary sculpture, but a figure believed to be imbued with the actual presence of the god. The statue was crafted from rare wood and covered in gold and silver, standing tall in a chamber that was dark, except for the flickering light of oil lamps and the glowing embers of incense burners. Ancient texts describe 7 different statues of Marduk throughout the city, but the primary image in the Esagila was known by the special name Asuli. This statue was not merely a representation of the god, but was treated as the god himself. It was fed daily meals of the finest foods, dressed in elaborate robes, and treated with the reverence due to a living king. The statue had its own household, staff, its own income from temple lands, and its own legal rights within Babylonian society. The daily rituals surrounding Marduk's statue followed a pattern that had been established over centuries. Each morning, the high priest would approach the inner sanctuary and perform the ritual of opening the mouth of the god, symbolically awakening Marduk from his nightly rest. The statue would be washed with sacred water, anointed with precious oils, and dressed in fresh garments. A meal would be prepared and offered to the god, and afterwards the priests would consume the food, believing they were sharing in divine communion. But it was during the great festival of Akichu, the Babylonian New Year celebration, that the true power and significance of Marduk became most apparent. This was not simply a religious observance, but a cosmic event that renewed the very foundations of the universe. The festival lasted 11 days, during which the entire city participated in rituals that reenacted the creation of the world and reaffirmed Marduk's sovereignty over the forces of chaos. The Akichu festival began with days of purification and preparation. The temple was cleansed, the priests underwent ritual purification, and the people of the city fasted and prayed. On the 4th day, the epic of creation was recited in its entirety, reminding everyone of Marduk's triumph over Tiamat and his establishment of cosmic order. The recitation was not merely a recounting of ancient history, but a magical ritual that renewed the power of the creation itself. Perhaps the most dramatic moment of the festival came when the king of Babylon himself entered the inner sanctuary of the temple. There, in the presence of Marduk's statue, a monarch underwent a ritual humiliation that was both deeply personal and profoundly symbolic. The high priest would strike the king, pulling his ears and forcing him to kneel before the god. The king would then recite a negative confession, declaring that he had not neglected the city, had not mistreated its people, and had not allowed the temple to fall into disrepair. Only after this ritual abasement would the high priest restore the king's crown and scepter, symbolically renewing his divine mandate to rule. This ceremony reminded everyone, including the king himself, that earthly power was subordinate to divine authority, and that even the mightiest monarch was merely a servant of the gods. The culmination of the Akichu festival was the sacred procession, when the statue of Marduk was carried from the Esagila temple to a special shrine outside the city walls. This journey was not merely ceremonial, but was believed to be necessary for the god to complete his annual victory over the forces of chaos. The procession moved along the magnificent processional way, past the Ishtar Gate with its glazed brick, dragons and lions, while the entire population of Babylon lined the route to witness their god's triumph. The atmosphere during these processions must have been electric with religious fervor and civic pride. The statue of Marduk, glittering with gold and precious stones, was carried on a special platform by the strongest priests, while other priests swung censers filled with aromatic incense. Musicians played sacred hymns, dancers performed ritual movements, and the people chanted prayers that had been passed down through generations. At the Bit Akichu, the special shrine outside the city, the final act of the festival took place. Here, in a ceremony that combined religious devotion with agricultural magic, the king would perform the sacred marriage ritual with a high priestess representing the goddess Ishtar. This union was believed to ensure the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the people for the coming year. The influence of Marduk extended far beyond the boundaries of Babylon itself. As the city's power grew, so did the reach of its god. Conquered cities were required to acknowledge Marduk's supremacy, and their local deities were incorporated into the Babylonian pantheon as subordinate to the great god of creation. In this way, Marduk became not just the patron of a single city, but the unifying deity of an entire empire. The symbol of Marduk was the maru, a kind of triangular spade or hoe that represented his role as both creator and agricultural deity. This symbol appeared on seals, monuments, and royal inscriptions throughout the Babylonian Empire, serving as a constant reminder of the god's power and presence. He was also associated with the Mashusu, a serpent dragon that combined the features of several different animals, representing the god's dominion over all creatures. By the first millennium before the Common Era, Marduk had also become associated with the planet Jupiter, the largest and most majestic of the wandering stars. Babylonian astronomers, who were also priests of the god, tracked Jupiter's movements across the sky with meticulous care, believing that the planet's behavior reflected Marduk's will and provided signs about the future of the kingdom. The theology that developed around Marduk was sophisticated and complex. He was seen as the god of justice, compassion, and healing, but also as a powerful warrior who could unleash devastating storms against his enemies. He was the patron of magic and wisdom, the protector of the city, and the guarantor of royal authority. Most importantly, he was the god who had established order in the universe and who continued to maintain that order against the ever-present threat of chaos. As the centuries passed and Babylon's political fortunes waxed and waned, the worship of Marduk remained constant. Even when the city was conquered by the Persians and later by the Greeks, the great temple of Esagila continued to function, and the statue of Marduk continued to receive offerings and prayers. The god who had begun as the patron of a single city had become something far greater, a symbol of the human desire for order, justice, and meaning in an often chaotic world. The priests who served Marduk were not merely religious functionaries, but scholars and intellectuals who preserved and transmitted the accumulated wisdom of Mesopotamian civilization. They were astronomers who tracked the movements of the stars, mathematicians who calculated the calendar, physicians who treated the sick, and scribes who recorded the laws and literature of their people. In serving their god, they served the cause of knowledge and civilization itself. Tonight, as we stand in the moonlit courtyards of the Esagila temple, we can almost sense the presence of something timeless and profound. The statue of Marduk may have long since crumbled to dust, and the priests who once chanted his praises may have been silent for millennia, but the idea that he represented the triumph of order over chaos, of civilization over barbarism, of hope over despair remains as relevant today as it was 4,000 years ago. In the flickering shadows cast by the moon's light on the temple walls, we can imagine the countless generations who found comfort and meaning in this place. Here, In the heart of ancient Babylon, humanity's eternal quest for the divine found one of its most magnificent expressions. And as we prepare to continue our journey through this city of wonders, we carry with us the understanding that some truths transcend time itself, and that the human spirit's reach toward the sacred is as constant as the stars that wheel overhead in their eternal dance. The year is 605 BC, and as dawn breaks over the Euphrates, a young prince named Nebuchadnezzar receives news that will change the course of history. His father, King Nabopolassar, has died, and the crown of Babylon now rests upon his shoulders. But this is no ordinary succession, for Nebuchadnezzar has already proven himself a commander of extraordinary skill, having just crushed the Egyptian army at the Battle of Carchemish, securing Babylon's dominance over the ancient Near East. Picture, if you will, the moment when Nebuchadnezzar first gazed upon his capital from the steps of the royal palace. The city sprawled before him like a jewel set in the desert, its walls gleaming in the morning sun, its temples reaching toward the heavens. Yet in his mind's eye, he saw not what was, but what could be. For Nebuchadnezzar possessed that rarest of gifts, the ability to dream in stone and gold, to envision beauty so magnificent that it would be remembered long after empires had crumbled to dust. Under his rule, which would span 43 years, Babylon would become the most magnificent city the world had ever seen. The young king understood that power was not merely about conquest, but about creation. He sought to build not just walls and palaces, but wonders that would inspire awe in all who beheld them. His architects and engineers were given unlimited resources, his craftsmen access to the finest materials from across the known world. The transformation began with the city's defenses. Nebuchadnezzar ordered the construction of walls so massive that they seemed to merge earth and sky. These were not mere barriers, but statements of intent, rising more than 40 feet high and thick enough for 2 chariots to pass each other at full gallop along their tops. The walls were fashioned from millions of bricks, each one stamped with the royal seal, each one a testament to the king's unwavering will. But it was not enough to simply fortify Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar sought to beautify it beyond all imagination. He commissioned the construction of the Ishtar Gate, a masterpiece of glazed brick artistry that would serve as the grand entrance to his city. The gate rose like a vision from a dream, its deep blue walls adorned with relief sculptures of dragons, bulls, and lions, each creature rendered in brilliant gold and white against the azure background dot. As visitors approached the gate, they would find themselves walking along the processional way, a broad avenue paved with stone and lined with more than 100 lions, each one crafted from glazed brick and seeming to guard the path to the city's heart. The psychological effect was profound. Here was a ruler who commanded not just armies, but the very forces of nature, who could make stone beasts stand, eternal watch over his domain. Yet perhaps the most ambitious of all Nebuchadnezzar's projects was born not from royal ego, but from love. The king had taken as his wife a Median princess named Amytis, a political alliance that would secure peace between their two peoples. But Amytis, raised in the green hills and valleys of Media, found herself homesick in the flat, dusty landscape of Babylon. She longed for the mountains of her homeland, for the cool shade of trees and the sound of flowing water. Nebuchadnezzar, witnessing his beloved's melancholy, conceived of a gift that would astound the world. If he could not bring his queen to her homeland, he would bring her homeland to Babylon. He would create a mountain of gardens, a green paradise rising from the desert like a vision of the gods themselves. The project that would become known as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon was an engineering marvel beyond compare. Imagine, if you can, a series of terraced gardens ascending in perfect symmetry, each level supported by massive arched vaults and connected by a complex system of stairs and ramps. The structure rose over 75 feet into the air, its various levels planted with every variety of tree, shrub, and flower that could be found in the known world. The engineering challenges were immense. How does one create a flowing river? On a manufactured mountain? How does one ensure that water reaches the highest terraces, while maintaining the delicate balance needed to prevent the structure from collapsing under its own weight? Nebuchadnezzar's engineers devised an ingenious solution. A series of hydraulic screws, later known as Archimedes screws, that would lift water from the Euphrates to the garden's highest points. Water flowed from terrace to terrace in carefully designed channels, creating the gentle sound of streams that Amethyst remembered from her childhood. The gardens were planted with date palms and fruit trees, with grapevines that cascaded down the walls like green waterfalls, with flowers that bloomed in every season, ensuring that the air was always filled with fragrance. But the hanging gardens were more than just a romantic gesture. They were a declaration of Nebuchadnezzar's power to reshape the very world according to his will, to create a forest in the desert, to make water flow upward, to construct a paradise that seemed to float in the air itself. This was the work of a ruler who recognized no limits to his ambition. His word of the gardens spread throughout the ancient world. They became a symbol of Babylon's incredible wealth and sophistication. Merchants and diplomats from distant lands would journey to Babylon not just to conduct business, but to witness with their own eyes this miracle of engineering and artistry. The gardens became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, ranking alongside the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Colossus of Rhodes. Yet the gardens were but one facet of Nebuchadnezzar's grand design for his city. He also undertook the complete reconstruction of the great ziggurat of Etemenanke, the tower that may have inspired the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. Under his direction, the ziggurat was rebuilt to reach even greater heights, its 7 levels ascending toward the heavens, like a man-made mountain dedicated to the god Marduk. The king's palace itself was expanded into a complex of unparalleled luxury. Its walls were decorated with glazed tiles depicting scenes of royal hunts and religious ceremonies, while its halls were filled with treasures gathered from across the empire. The throne room, where Nebuchadnezzar would receive foreign dignitaries and conduct the business of state, was designed to overwhelm visitors with its grandeur. Its ceiling so high that it seemed to touch the sky itself. But perhaps most importantly, Nebuchadnezzar understood that true immortality came not from conquest alone, but from the marriage of power and beauty. He patronized the arts and sciences, establishing libraries and schools that would preserve and expand human knowledge. Under his rule, Babylon became not just a military powerhouse, but a center of learning and culture that drew scholars and artists from throughout the known world. The king's attention to detail was legendary. He would personally inspect construction sites, ensuring that every brick was properly placed, every relief sculpture perfectly carved. He understood that the difference between mere architecture and true wonder lay in the accumulation of countless small perfections, each one contributing to the overall effect of sublime beauty. As the years passed and Nebuchadnezzar's building projects neared completion, visitors to Babylon would find themselves in a city that seemed to exist outside the normal bounds of possibility. The Ishtar Gate gleamed like a portal to another world. The hanging gardens defied the laws of nature, and the great ziggurat pierced the heavens themselves. Here was a place where human ambition had been given physical form, where dreams had been transformed into stone and gold. Yet beneath all this grandeur lay a deeper truth about Nebuchadnezzar's character. He was not content to be merely a conqueror or administrator. He sought to be a creator, a builder of beauty that would outlast the centuries. In this, he achieved a form of immortality that no warrior could claim through victory alone. For while his armies have been forgotten, his architectural achievements continue to inspire wonder and admiration even today, the king's legacy was not built through destruction, but through creation. He understood that the most profound form of power was not the ability to tear down, but the ability to build up, to create something of such beauty and significance that it would be remembered, long after the builder's name had faded from memory. In the gentle whisper of wind through the ruins of Babylon, we can still hear the echo of his golden dreams, still feel the presence of a ruler who dared to make the impossible real as night falls over the ancient city, and the last light of day fades from the glazed tiles of the Ishtar Gate. We are reminded that some dreams are too beautiful to die. They live on in the imagination, in the stories passed down through generations, in the eternal human desire to create something worthy of wonder. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon may have crumbled to dust, but the golden dreams that built it continue to shine as bright and inspiring as ever in the starlit sky above the desert where legends were born. The narrow cobblestone streets of Babylon come alive before the sun has fully risen above the horizon. From the 3-story houses that line each thoroughfare, families emerge to begin another day in this bustling metropolis. The air is filled with the mingled aromas of fresh bread baking in clay ovens, the sweet scent of dates drying in the courtyards, and the earthy smell of the canals that bring life-giving water from the mighty Euphrates. Imagine yourself standing at the corner of one of these streets, watching as the city stirs to life. The houses around you are marvels of practical design, their flat roofs serving as additional living space where families gather in the cool evening air. Even the homes of the poor, modest though they may be, are constructed with the same attention to comfort and functionality that characterizes all Babylonian architecture. The first to emerge are the farmers, though unlike their counterparts in other civilizations, these men do not live upon the land they cultivate. Instead, they make their homes here within the protective walls of the city, traveling each day to tend the fields that stretch along the canal systems beyond the gates. They carry with them the tools of their trade, wooden plows, bronze sickles, and baskets woven from river reeds. Their faces are weathered by sun and wind, but their eyes hold the quiet satisfaction of those who know their labor feeds a great city. Following close behind are the craftsmen, the skilled artisans whose workshops form the economic heart of Babylon. There was much to buy, like fresh fruits and vegetables, baked breads and cheese, warm coats, gold jewelry, and date wine. The metal workers emerge with their leather aprons already tied, ready to spend the day at their forges, shaping bronze, and iron into tools, weapons, and decorative objects. The sound of their hammers will soon ring out across the city, a percussion that speaks of productivity and purpose. In the pottery quarter, the ceramic artisans prepare their wheels in clay, their hands already stained with the earthy material that will become vessels for storing grain, oil, and wine. These are not merely functional objects, but works of art in their own right, decorated with intricate patterns and glazed in colors that capture the light like precious gems. The potters work with a meditative rhythm, their wheels turning steadily, as they shape the clay with movements perfected through years of practice. The weavers, too, are preparing for their day's work. Barley and wool were the mainstays of Babylonian day-to-day life and commerce. The sound of looms clicking can be heard from many houses, as skilled hands work threads of wool and linen into textiles that will clothe the citizens of Babylon and be traded far beyond the city's walls. The patterns they create tell stories, some depicting scenes from daily life, others showing the great deeds of kings and gods. As the morning progresses, the marketplaces begin to fill with activity. Marketplaces offered local artisans and farmers the opportunity to sell their products, while merchants introduced exotic goods from distant regions. These bustling centers of commerce are where the true cosmopolitan nature of Babylon becomes apparent. Here, a farmer from the countryside might find himself bargaining with a merchant who has traveled from the mountains of Persia or the forests of Lebanon. the stalls overflow with abundance. Baskets of barley and wheat form golden pyramids, while dates of every variety, from the common to the rare, glisten like amber in the morning sun. The air is rich with the scent of spices brought from distant lands, cinnamon from the mysterious East, frankincense from the Arabian Peninsula, and cedar oil from the mountains of Lebanon. Trade was critical to old Babylonia, where many highly prized natural resources were scarce, but agricultural goods were in surplus. Among the most respected members of Babylonian society are the scribes, those learned individuals who have mastered the complex art of cuneiform writing. Young pupils learn to read and write the complex cuneiform script, while more advanced students studied topics like mathematics, religion, and law. These men carry with them the tools of their trade, styluses made from reed, clay tablets, and small portable writing boards. They move through the city with quiet dignity, for they are the keepers of knowledge, the bridges between the spoken and written word. The education of these scribes begins in childhood, in small schools scattered throughout the city. Students entered school before the age of 10 and graduated around 12 years later, having mastered cuneiform. In these modest buildings, young boys sit cross-legged on reed mats, their faces focused in concentration as they practice forming the wedge-shaped marks that make up their written language. The schoolmaster, often a retired temple scribe or government official, guides them through the intricacies of the script with patience and firm discipline. The curriculum extends far beyond simple literacy. As the students progress, they delve into mathematics, learning to work with the sexagesimal system that divides the circle into 360 degrees and the hour into 60 minutes. They study astronomy, memorizing the movements of the stars and planets that their ancestors have observed for generations. They learn law, medicine, and theology, preparing themselves for careers that will serve the temple, the palace, or the merchant houses that drive the city's economy. In the temple complexes, another vital segment of Babylonian society goes about its daily work. The priests, draped in their ceremonial robes, perform the rituals that maintain the favor of the gods. But their duties extend far beyond the purely religious. They are also astronomers, mathematicians, and physicians, combining spiritual wisdom with practical knowledge. During the 8th and 7th centuries BC, Babylonian astronomers developed a new empirical approach to astronomy. The temple scribes work in quiet chambers, copying sacred texts and maintaining the vast archives that record everything from religious ceremonies to commercial transactions. Their work requires not only skill with the stylus, but also deep knowledge of theological concepts and mathematical principles. Many of the astronomical calculations that will influence agriculture, religious festivals, and even political decisions are performed within these sacred walls. The physicians of Babylon blend practical medical knowledge with spiritual healing practices. They understand the properties of herbs and minerals, can set broken bones and treat wounds, and maintain detailed records of symptoms and treatments. Their patients come from all levels of society, from wealthy merchants to humble craftsmen, for illness recognizes no social boundaries in the ancient world. As the day progresses and the sun climbs higher, the rhythm of life in Babylon becomes even more pronounced. The streets fill with people going about their daily business. Children play games in the narrow alleys, their laughter echoing off the brick walls. Women gather at the public fountains to draw water and exchange news, their conversations creating a network of information that flows through the city as surely as the water through the canals. The merchant houses are centers of intense activity. Here, agents calculate profits and losses, arrange for caravans to distant lands, and negotiate contracts written in the cuneiform script. The mathematics they employ are sophisticated, involving compound interest, profit-sharing agreements, and complex accounting systems that would be familiar to modern business people. These merchants are the threads that weave Babylon into the larger tapestry of the ancient world's economy. In the residential quarters, families gather for their midday meal. The food is simple but nourishing. Barley bread, dates, cheese made from goat's milk, and vegetables grown in the fertile fields outside the city. Beer, brewed from barley and flavored with herbs, is the common drink for adults, while children might have milk or water sweetened with honey. The meal is eaten in the courtyard of the house, where the family can enjoy the cooling breeze and the shade of date palms. The afternoon brings different activities. The heat of the day encourages a slower pace, and many people retreat to their homes for rest. This is when the scholars and priests often do their most intensive work, studying texts, making calculations, and preparing for the evening ceremonies. The astronomers prepare for the night's observations, checking their instruments and reviewing their star charts. As evening approaches, the character of the city changes once again. The workshops begin to quiet, and the workers return to their homes. The streets fill with people enjoying the cooler air, visiting friends, or simply walking through the city's beautiful gardens and courtyards. The sound of music drifts from open windows as families gather to share the events of the day and to plan for tomorrow. The taverns and beer houses become centers of social activity. Here, merchants discuss their latest ventures, craftsmen share techniques and trade secrets, and scholars debate philosophical questions. The conversations are animated but friendly, for these gathering places serve as important social institutions where relationships are formed and maintained. As night falls over Babylon, the city takes on a different character. The narrow streets are illuminated by oil lamps and torches, casting dancing shadows on the glazed brick walls. The astronomers climb to their observation platforms, ready to continue the work of mapping the heavens that has occupied their predecessors for generations. The night watch takes up their positions, ensuring the safety of the sleeping city. In the homes throughout Babylon, families gather for the evening meal and the day's final activities. Parents tell stories to their children, passing down the ancient tales of gods and heroes that form the foundation of Babylonian culture. The elderly share their wisdom with the younger generation, ensuring that the knowledge accumulated over centuries continues to flow from one generation to the next. The rhythm of life in Babylon is one of purpose and community. Each person, from the humblest laborer to the most learned priest, plays a vital role in the functioning of this great city. The result is a society that is both sophisticated and stable, one that can support not only the basic needs of its citizens, but also the creation of art, literature, and architecture that will be admired for millennia to come. As we quietly withdraw from these ancient streets, leaving the people of Babylon to their well-earned rest, we carry with us a deeper understanding of what made this city great. It was not just the magnificent buildings or the powerful kings, but the daily dedication of ordinary people who understood that their individual efforts contributed to something far greater than themselves. In the gentle rhythm of their daily lives, we find the true heartbeat of one of history's greatest civilizations. As the last whispers of night begin to fade, we find ourselves in the presence of these remarkable individuals who transformed the simple act of looking upward into one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements. The Babylonian astronomers were not merely stargazers. They were the architects of time itself, the creators of mathematical systems that still govern our understanding of the universe today. Picture, if you will, the highest platform of the great ziggurat of Etemenanke, where a lone figure stands wrapped in a woolen cloak against the cool night air. In his hands, he holds a clay tablet, its surface covered with precise cuneiform markings that record the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable accuracy. This is no casual observation, but part of a systematic study that has been conducted for generations, each night's work building upon the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The Babylonian approach to astronomy was revolutionary in its methodical precision. By observing the seasonal movement of the sun, moon, and planets, the Babylonians connected their beliefs of divine intervention in their everyday life to space and time. They understood that the heavens operated according to discoverable patterns, and they dedicated themselves to uncovering these celestial rhythms with the same patience that a skilled craftsman brings to perfecting his art. These ancient scholars developed what we now recognize as the foundation of modern timekeeping. The Babylonian system of mathematics was a sexagesimal base 60 numeral system. From this we derive the modern-day usage of 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. This was not an arbitrary choice, but a carefully reasoned system that emerged from their deep understanding of celestial mechanics. The decision to divide the circle into 360 degrees arose from their observations of the sun's annual journey across the sky, so they adopted an old idea once used during the third millennium for an administrative calendar, 12 months of 30 days in a year, making a 360-day cycle. This ideal calendar became the foundation for their mathematical understanding of circular motion, a concept that would influence mathematics and astronomy for millennia to come. The sophistication of Babylonian mathematics extended far beyond simple arithmetic. The Babylonians were able to make great advances in mathematics for two reasons. Firstly, the number 60 is a superior highly composite number, having factors of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, 60, including those that are themselves composite, facilitating calculations with fractions. This mathematical elegance allowed them to perform complex calculations with a fluidity that would not be matched for centuries. Consider the quiet concentration of a Babylonian astronomer as he works through his calculations by lamplight. Before him lies a collection of clay tablets containing observations stretching back hundreds of years. He is not merely recording what he sees. He is seeking to understand the underlying mathematical relationships that govern celestial motion. His work represents one of humanity's first attempts to apply rigorous mathematical analysis to natural phenomena. The Babylonian astronomers were particularly skilled at predicting eclipses, those dramatic moments when the sun or moon would be temporarily obscured. Early astrological texts focused on lunar eclipses, and these celestial events were viewed as messages from the gods that required careful interpretation. The ability to predict these occurrences was not merely an academic exercise. It was a practical necessity for a civilization that saw divine will expressed through celestial events. Their lunar calendar was a masterpiece of practical astronomy. Babylonian calendar, chronological system used in ancient Mesopotamia, based on a year of 12 synodic months, i.e., 12 complete cycles of phases of the moon. This lunar year of about 354 days was more or less reconciled with the solar year, or year of the seasons, by the occasional intercalation of additional months. This system required constant observation and adjustment, demonstrating the Babylonian sophisticated understanding of the relationship between lunar and solar cycles. The development of the zodiac represents perhaps their most enduring contribution to human understanding of the cosmos. The Babylonians used the sexagesimal system to trace the planets' transits. By dividing the 360-degree sky into 30 degrees, they assigned 12 zodiacal signs to the stars along the ecliptic. This was not merely a system of mythology, but a practical framework for organizing and predicting celestial motion. 12 of their astrological constellations, those lying on the ecliptic, became the zodiac. Then, as Babylonians became more concerned with mathematical astronomy and less concerned with direct observation, they regularized the zodiac to 12 equal signs of 30 degrees. This mathematical regularity made it possible to perform precise calculations about planetary positions and movements, transforming astronomy from an art of observation into a science of prediction. The Babylonian astronomers possessed a deep spiritual connection to their work. They associated the planets with different gods in their pantheon: Jupiter with Marduk, Venus with Ishtar, Saturn with Ninurta, Mercury with Nebu, Mars with Nergal, the sun with Shamash, and the moon with Sin. This was not mere superstition, but a sophisticated theological framework that helped them organize their observations and understand their place in the cosmic order. In the quiet hours of the night, as the astronomer makes his careful notations, he is participating in a tradition that stretches back to the earliest days of civilization. Each measurement, each calculation, each observation is part of a vast collaborative effort spanning generations. The knowledge he records tonight will be studied by future astronomers, who will build upon his work to create even more accurate models of celestial motion. The practical applications of Babylonian astronomy extended far beyond the academic. Their calendar system governed religious festivals, agricultural activities, and commercial transactions. The ability to predict the flooding of rivers, the optimal times for planting and harvesting, and the scheduling of religious ceremonies all depended on accurate astronomical observations. In this way, the study of the heavens became intimately connected with the rhythms of daily life. The mathematical tablets produced by Babylonian astronomers represent some of the earliest examples of systematic scientific record keeping. Plimpton 322, the most famous Babylonian mathematical tablet. From circa 1600 BC, it strongly suggests that the Babylonian mathematicians had a procedure for calculating Pythagorean triples, i.e., integer numbers that satisfy Pythagoras' theorem. This demonstrates that their mathematical sophistication extended beyond astronomy into pure mathematics, establishing principles that would later be developed by Greek mathematicians. The influence of Babylonian astronomy extended far beyond their own civilization. The results of Babylonian astronomy were adopted by the Greeks in the classical period, and the division of the ecliptic into 360 degrees was adopted notably by Ptolemy in his Almagest, the most influential astronomical book in late antiquity and the Middle Ages. Through this transmission, Babylonian astronomical knowledge became the foundation for European astronomy, influencing scientific thought for over 1,000 years. As we watch the Babylonian astronomer complete his night's work, carefully storing his tablets in the temple archives, we witness a moment of profound historical significance. This quiet dedication to systematic observation and mathematical analysis represents humanity's first systematic attempt to understand the universe through reason and calculation rather than myth and superstition alone. Asterisk, the legacy of these ancient stargazers surrounds us still. Every time we glance at a clock and see the familiar division of hours and minutes, every time we speak of 360 degrees in a circle, every time we consult a calendar that divides the year into 12 months, we are using concepts first developed in the observatories of ancient Babylon. Their patient work in the darkness of the night continues to illuminate our understanding of time and space, in the gentle pre-dawn light. As the astronomer descends from his observation platform, he carries with him the satisfaction of having added another small piece to humanity's growing understanding of the cosmos. The stars have spoken to him in the language of mathematics, and he has carefully recorded their message for future generations. In this quiet moment, we glimpse the birth of science itself, emerging from the marriage of careful observation and mathematical reasoning that would forever change humanity's relationship with the natural world. Asterisk, the Babylonian astronomers taught us that the universe operates according to discoverable laws, that patient observation can reveal the hidden patterns that govern celestial motion, and that mathematics provides the key to understanding these cosmic rhythms. Their work reminds us that some of humanity's greatest achievements have come not from those who spoke the loudest or wielded the most power, but from those who watched quietly, thought carefully, and recorded faithfully the subtle patterns that others might have overlooked. The year is 539 B.C., and the mighty walls of Babylon stand as imposing as ever, their glazed bricks still gleaming in the desert sun. Yet within these walls, a profound change is stirring, one that will forever alter the destiny of this greatest of ancient cities. For the first time in over a millennium, Babylon is about to fall under foreign rule, not through the thunder of siege engines or the clash of armies, but through the quiet acceptance of a new order. The fall of Babylon occurred in 539 B.C., when the Persian Empire conquered the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The success of the Persian campaign, led by Cyrus the Great, brought an end to the reign of the last native dynasty of Mesopotamia and gave the Persians control over the rest of the Fertile Crescent. This moment would mark the beginning of a long, slow decline that would transform the city from a living center of civilization into a collection of ruins, haunted by the ghosts of its former glory. Imagine, if you will, a scene as in 539 B.C. they opened their gates to the Persians, who entered the city in peace, amidst joy and jubilation, according to an inscription touting Cyrus's triumph. The great Ishtar Gate, that marvel of glazed brick, and golden lions swung open not to repel invaders, but to welcome them. The conquest was quick, for even the priests of Marduk, the national deity of the great metropolis of Babylon, had become estranged from Nabonidus. The reasons for this peaceful surrender lay not in military weakness, but in the growing disconnect between the city's rulers and its people. The last Babylonian king, Nabonidus, had alienated the powerful priesthood and neglected the traditional religious observances that had bound the city together for centuries. When Cyrus approached with his promise of religious tolerance and respect for local customs, the Babylonians saw not a conqueror, but a liberator. In October 539 BCE, the Persian king Cyrus took Babylon, the ancient capital of an empire covering modern Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. In a broader sense, Babylon was the ancient world's capital of scholarship and science. The subject provinces soon recognized Cyrus as their legitimate ruler. The transition was so smooth that life in the city continued much as it had before, with markets functioning, scribes recording transactions, and astronomers continuing their observations of the heavens. Yet beneath this apparent continuity, something fundamental had changed. Babylon was no longer the center of its own world, but merely another jewel in the crown of the vast Persian Empire. The great kings who had once ruled from the throne of Marduk now governed from distant Persepolis, and the city that had once dictated terms to the known world now awaited instructions from foreign capitals. Under Persian rule, Babylon maintained much of its cultural and economic importance. The Persians, unlike many conquerors, respected the city's ancient traditions and allowed its institutions to continue functioning. The great temples remained active, the schools continued to educate young scribes, and the merchants still conducted their business along the ancient trade routes. He honored his subjects and cared for them as if they were his own children, and they, on their part, revered Cyrus as a father. For nearly 2 centuries, Babylon endured as a significant city within the Persian Empire, its wealth and learning still renowned throughout the ancient world. The city's astronomers continued their groundbreaking work. Its craftsmen still produced goods of exceptional quality, and its position along the Euphrates ensured its continued importance as a commercial center. Yet gradually, imperceptibly, the city's unique identity began to fade as it became increasingly integrated into the broader Persian cultural sphere. The next great upheaval came with the arrival of a young Macedonian king whose ambitions would reshape the entire ancient world. Alexander the Great conquered Babylon in 333 BC for the Macedonians and died there in 323 BC. For a brief moment, it seemed that Babylon might once again become the center of a great empire, as Alexander chose the city as one of his primary capitals and began planning its restoration and expansion. Alexander's vision for Babylon was grand indeed. He intended to make it the administrative center of his vast empire, a place where East and West would meet and blend into a new form of civilization. He ordered the restoration of the great ziggurat, planned new construction projects, and encouraged the settlement of Greek colonists alongside the native Babylonian population. For the first time in generations, there was hope that the city might reclaim its position as the greatest metropolis of the ancient world. But Alexander's dreams died with him in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, and Babylonia and Assyria then became part of the Greek Seleucid Empire. The city found itself once again ruled by foreigners, this time Greeks, who established their own capital at Seleucia, a new city built on the Tigris River. The Greek rulers, while not actively hostile to Babylon, saw it as part of their past rather than their future, and gradually diverted resources and attention to their new foundations. The establishment of Seleucia marked the beginning of Babylon's true decline. It has long been maintained that the foundation of Seleucia diverted the population to the new capital of Lower Mesopotamia, and that the ruins of the old city became a quarry for the builders of the new seat of government. But the recent publication of the Babylonian Chronicles has shown that urban life was still very much the same well into the Parthian Empire, 150 BC to 226 AD. The city did not collapse overnight, but rather began a slow process of attrition as its most skilled inhabitants migrated to newer, more prosperous centers. Picture the gradual transformation of the great city as the centuries passed. The magnificent palaces, once bustling with courtiers and administrators, stood increasingly empty. The great walls, no longer maintained by royal decree, began to show the effects of weather and time. The hanging gardens, if they ever existed, fell into disrepair as the complex irrigation systems that sustained them required constant maintenance that was no longer forthcoming. The Parthian conquest in 150 BC brought yet another foreign dynasty to rule over Babylon, though by this time the city had already lost much of its former significance. The Parthian king Mithridates conquered the region into the Arsacid Empire in 150 BC, and the region became something of a battleground between Greeks and Parthians. The city found itself caught between competing empires, its strategic location, making it a prize to be contested rather than a center to be developed. As the centuries passed, the very foundations of Babylonian civilization began to crumble. The cuneiform script, which had been the medium of learning and administration for over 3 millennia, gradually gave way to Aramaic and later to Greek. The ancient temples, deprived of royal patronage and popular support, fell into decay. The schools that had preserved and transmitted the accumulated wisdom of generations closed their doors as fewer students came to learn the old ways. The final blow came with the rise of Islam in the 7th century CE. The city declined after the Muslim Arab conquest in the 7th century CE and was finally abandoned. The new rulers, focused on their own capitals at Damascus and later Baghdad, had little interest in maintaining the ancient city. Babylon stopped functioning as an urban center between the 2nd century BC and the 7th century CE. Over those 700 years, it gradually declined from a major city to near total abandonment. The process of abandonment was gradual and melancholy. Families that had lived in the city for generations packed their belongings and moved to new homes in Baghdad or other thriving centers. The great markets that had once hummed with activity from dawn to dusk stood empty, their stalls gradually dismantled for building materials. The canals that had brought life to the city began to silt up, their careful maintenance no longer a priority for distant rulers. As the human population dwindled, nature began to reclaim the city. Sand drifted through the empty streets, accumulating in the courtyards and gardens where children had once played. The glazed tiles of the Ishtar Gate, masterpieces of ancient artistry, were carried away by treasure hunters and local builders, who saw them merely as convenient building materials. The great walls, once the pride of Nebuchadnezzar, became sources of ready-made bricks for construction projects in other cities. The knowledge preserved in Babylon's libraries suffered a similar fate. The clay tablets that contained the accumulated wisdom of millennia were scattered or destroyed, their cuneiform inscriptions meaningless to later inhabitants who could no longer read the ancient script. The astronomical observations that had revolutionized humanity's understanding of the cosmos were lost, along with the mathematical innovations that had made such observations possible. Yet even in decline, Babylon retained a powerful hold on the human imagination. The city's name became synonymous with both grandeur and corruption in the biblical tradition, a symbol of earthly power that was ultimately transient. Christian and Islamic writers would use Babylon as a metaphor for worldly pride and the inevitable fall of all earthly kingdoms, ensuring that the city's memory would survive long after its physical remains had crumbled to dust. For centuries, Babylon existed only in legend and literature. It was known only through biblical narratives and classical writers until its discovery in the 19th century. The exact location of the once great city had been forgotten, and scholars debated whether it had ever existed at all or was merely a literary creation. The site where Nebuchadnezzar had once held court became a collection of mysterious mounds that local inhabitants called Babel, their ancient significance lost to memory when European archaeologists finally began excavating the site in the 19th century. They found a city that had been thoroughly plundered and weathered by time. The magnificent buildings described by ancient writers had been reduced to foundations and scattered fragments. The hanging gardens, if they ever existed, had left no trace. Even the great ziggurat had been so thoroughly demolished that its original height and configuration could only be guessed at from scattered remains and ancient descriptions. The modern world's attempt to reconnect with Babylon's legacy has been complicated by the political turmoil that has plagued the region. In the 1980s, restoration attempts were made under then-President Saddam Hussein, but these efforts were controversial and often historically inaccurate. The site has suffered further damage from neglect and the effects of nearby military activities, making the task of understanding Babylon's original glory even more challenging. Today, Babylon's ruins are located about 55 miles, 88 kilometers, south of Baghdad, Iraq, and is classified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors to the site can see the partially reconstructed outlines of the ancient city, walk through the foundations of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, and stand before the partially restored Ishtar Gate. Yet these remains, impressive as they are, can only hint at the grandeur that once made Babylon the wonder of the ancient world. The story of Babylon's decline serves as a profound meditation on the transience of human achievement. Here was a city that had seemed permanent, its walls so mighty that they appeared to challenge the heavens themselves. Its rulers had commanded vast armies, its merchants had traded across continents, and its scholars had unlocked the secrets of the cosmos. Yet all of this grandeur proved as ephemeral as the desert wind that now blows through its empty streets. As we stand in the gentle twilight among the ruins of this once great city, we are reminded that all earthly kingdoms must eventually pass away. The rise and fall of Babylon teaches us that true immortality lies not in the monuments we build or the empires we conquer, but in the knowledge we preserve, the beauty we create, and the wisdom we pass on to future generations. In this sense, Babylon has never truly died, for its contributions to human civilization continue to shape our world in ways both visible and invisible. The city that once touched the sky may have crumbled to dust, but its legacy lives on in the mathematics we use, the calendar we follow, and the very concept of urban civilization itself. In the end, Perhaps this is the most fitting monument to Babylon's greatness. Not the ruins that remain, but the invisible foundations upon which all subsequent civilization has been built. And so, dear friend, we come to the end of our moonlit journey through the corridors of time, where the whispers of ancient Babylon still echo in the gentle night breeze. As you settle deeper into your pillows, let us walk together one last time through the memories of this magnificent city that once touched the sky. The sands of Iraq shift quietly tonight, covering and uncovering fragments of glazed brick that once formed the mighty walls of Babylon. Each grain of sand carries within it the memory of footsteps that walked these streets 4,000 years ago. The shepherds who tend their flocks in the countryside sometimes find small pieces of blue ceramic, remnants of the great Ishtar Gate, glinting in the morning sun like forgotten stars fallen to earth. Though the physical city has long since crumbled into dust, Babylon lives on in ways its ancient builders never could have imagined. Every time someone speaks of a place where many languages mix together, they unknowingly honor the memory of that great tower that once rose toward heaven. The word Babel itself has become our gentle way of describing the beautiful confusion of voices in a crowded marketplace, the overlapping conversations in a busy cafe, or the delightful chatter of children at play. The conflation of Babel with Babel traces back to Genesis 11-9, where the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And scholars have noted the phonological similarity between Babylonian Babilu, meaning gate of God, and the Hebrew word Balal, meaning mixed or confused. How beautifully fitting that a city whose very name meant gate of God should give us our word for the joyful mixing of human voices. In the great libraries of the world, patient scholars still study the cuneiform tablets that survived Babylon's fall. These clay records, baked hard by time and fire, preserve the dreams and daily concerns of people who lived when the world was young. A merchant's account of grain purchases, a student's practice tablet learning to write his name, a priest's careful observation of Venus rising at dawn. Each tablet is a small window into lives lived with the same hopes and fears that fill our own hearts tonight. The mathematical wisdom of Babylon flows through our modern world like an underground river. Every time we divide a circle into 360 degrees, we honor the Babylonian scholars who first made this division. When we measure time in hours of 60 minutes, with each minute containing 60 seconds, we continue a tradition that began in those ancient academies beside the Euphrates. The very way we organize our weeks into 7 days echoes the Babylonian reverence for the 7 wandering stars, the planets that moved mysteriously across the face of heaven. Babylonian philosophy had an influence on Greek philosophy, particularly Hellenistic philosophy, with the Babylonian text dialogue of pessimism, containing similarities to the agnostic thought of the sophists, the Heraclitean doctrine of contrasts, and the dialogues of Plato, the great questions that the Babylonian philosophers asked about the nature of existence, the meaning of suffering, and the purpose of human life continue to echo in our own searching hearts. In the world of art and literature, Babylon has become a symbol that carries deep emotional weight. Due to Babylon's historical significance, as well as references to it in the Bible, the word Babylon in various languages has acquired a generic meaning of a large, bustling, diverse city. When poets speak of urban complexity, when musicians sing of spiritual exile, when storytellers need a name for a place of both wonder and warning, they turn to Babylon. The city has become a metaphor for human ambition at its most magnificent and most dangerous. The gardens of Babylon, whether they existed in stone and soil or only in the realm of dreams, continue to inspire landscape architects and city planners. The vision of green terraces rising in harmony with urban architecture, of water flowing through carefully planned channels to nourish plants far from their natural habitat, speaks to our eternal human desire to create paradise In the midst of civilization, every rooftop garden, every urban park, every attempt to bring nature into the heart of a city carries within it an echo of that ancient dream. The religious influence of Babylon extends far beyond its geographical boundaries or historical period. In the biblical context, Babylon often symbolizes worldliness, which represents a desire for beauty and splendor, untempered by a love for holiness. Yet this symbolic use speaks to something deeper than simple condemnation. It acknowledges the seductive power of human achievement, the way our greatest accomplishments can become sources of both pride and spiritual danger. The story of Babylon reminds us that building toward heaven requires not just engineering skill, but wisdom of the heart. In our modern age of global communication, when languages mix and merge through technology, when cultures blend in ways the ancient world could never have imagined, we are living in a kind of new Babylon. The Internet has created a tower of voices that reaches around the world, where millions of people share their thoughts in hundreds of languages. Perhaps the ancient dream of a united humanity building together toward the sky is being fulfilled in ways the builders of the original tower never expected. The archaeological work at Babylon continues slowly, respectfully, with each season, bringing new discoveries. German archaeologists, following in the footsteps of those who first excavated the Ishtar Gate more than a century ago, still find fragments of the great city. Iraqi scholars work alongside international teams, carefully reconstructing not just the physical remains, but the cultural context that gave them meaning. Every shard of pottery, every bronze tool, every foundation stone tells part of the story of human creativity and ambition. The night sky above ancient Babylon still turns in its eternal dance, and the constellations that the Babylonian astronomers named and mapped continue their patient journey across the heavens. The bright star Regulus, which they called the King, still shines in the constellation Leo. The planet Venus, which they tracked so carefully in their observations, still rises as both morning and evening star, just as it did when their priests climbed the steps of the ziggurat to make their careful notes. In the quiet moments before sleep, when the busy thoughts of the day begin to settle like dust after a windstorm, we can almost hear the echoes of those ancient voices. The hymns sung in the temple of Marduk, the conversations in the marketplace, the laughter of children playing in the shadow of the great walls. The human experiences that filled the streets of Babylon 4 millennia ago are not so different from our own. People then, as now, worried about their families, celebrated their joys, wondered about their place in the vast cosmos, and hoped for peace in their hearts. The legacy of Babylon is not just in museums and history books, but in the very structure of human civilization. The concept of written law, first made famous by Hammurabi's code, continues to evolve in our modern legal systems. The idea of the city as a center of learning and culture, exemplified by Babylon's schools and libraries, lives on in our universities and cultural institutions. The dream of architectural magnificence, of buildings that inspire awe and wonder, continues to drive the imaginations of architects and engineers. As our journey through the whispers of Babylon comes to its peaceful close, let us carry with us the deeper truths that this ancient city teaches. That human dreams, once dreamed with sufficient passion and skill, never truly die. That the desire to build something greater than ourselves, to reach toward heaven, whether literally or figuratively, is one of the most beautiful aspects of human nature. That wisdom and knowledge, carefully preserved and passed down through generations, are among our most precious treasures. The stones of Babylon may have crumbled, but the spirit that built them remains alive in every human heart that dreams of creating something beautiful, something lasting, something that might touch the sky. In our own small ways, we are all builders of Babylon, reaching toward light, seeking understanding, trying to make sense of our place in the great cosmic story. Tonight, As you drift toward sleep, you carry within you the memory of that great city beside the Euphrates. You have walked through its blue-tiled gates, stood in the shadow of its tower, breathed the air of its hanging gardens. You have touched, however briefly, the dreams of people who lived when the world was young, but who shared with us the eternal human hope for meaning, for beauty, for connection with something greater than ourselves. The whispers of Babylon will continue long after our voices have joined the great silence. In the turning of the stars, in the flowing of rivers, in the patient work of human hands building toward tomorrow, the spirit of that ancient city lives on. And in your dreams tonight, perhaps you will see again the golden lions of the Ishtar Gate, the green terraces of the hanging gardens, and the great ziggurat reaching toward the stars, reminding us all that some things, once truly beautiful, echo in the human heart forever. Sleep well, dear friend. The gates of Babylon are open, and your dreams await beyond the threshold of night.